Hey guys, welcome back. It's a Saturday morning here. I am out on the trail. As you can see, it's a pretty foggy morning here in North Carolina. The trail is extremely muddy. It's been raining here for the past few days and got a little bit of a freeze, so everything's thawing out. In fact, some of the trails that I was going to do today were closed due to the conditions. But either way, I'm out here loving the solitude of winter photography and winter hiking. But that's one of the things I'm going to talk about here today. A lot of photographers like to hibernate during the winter months. It can be pretty gray, it can be pretty dreary. It's not the luscious greens of summer or spring, but there's plenty of opportunity to get out there and still shoot, work on your photography, and come up with great photographs. So that's what I'm going to talk about here today. And this is sort of tip number one. And that's go out, if it's going to be foggy conditions, go out, find some woodlands like you have here behind me. Woodland photography is great, especially when it's foggy like this. You can really create something that feels almost ethereal in a sense. But I'm going to share up one of the pictures that I took here this morning. Again, this wasn't necessarily my preferred destination this morning. In fact, I had probably 3 or 4 other places that I had on my list before this. But I think I still got a really good photograph out here. So I'm going to share that up and let me know what you think. So you can see in the picture that I shared out, I added myself as a focal point of the overall scene. I also like that bridge. I thought it added a little bit of interest to the overall photograph. But you don't necessarily have to add a person per se into the picture to make it interesting. The other thing I like to do is during sort of those foggy mornings deep in the woods, just find a tree that has unique features or any level of interest, sort of center that up on the picture, and the rest of the forest will sort of fade out, adding that bit of depth to it because of the fog. So that, for me, that's sort of trick number one, or tip number one, for shooting in the winter, is going out and finding those foggy scenes. And the next tip that I'm going to jump into, sort of related because it's also a result of weather, is going out and shooting sunrise and sunset. Now, I do this in every season, but winter in particular tends to have better sunrises and sunsets in terms of color and those high clouds. And there's actually a reason for that. So the weather during the winter season, those weather fronts move in actually quicker than they do in the summer. In the summer, you deal with sort of that haziness that sort of blocks out a bit of the color. Whereas in the winter time, that clear, crisp air that rolls in because of the cold fronts that move through very quickly result in a higher number of good sunrises and sunsets. If you haven't checked out my second episode, I dive into some of the weather apps that I use to sort of forecast good sunrises and sunsets. But here's one that I captured actually the day right after New Year's Day, after this foggy morning hike. So you can see in the winter time the weather changes very quickly, but there's opportunities out there to shoot a variety of different things. So here's that photo. So obviously the image that I captured is a sunrise over mountain layers. Shot it here in North Carolina. But the important thing here when you're taking sunrise and sunset photos, and this applies not just to winter but to any season, is to make sure that you're still capturing some focal point, some subject in your photograph. And that can be mountain layers, like in my example. It can be a body of water like a lake or a pond. It's always interesting to see those sunrise or sunset colors reflecting off of water. Or it could just be a stroll around your neighborhood and finding something interesting, whether it's an old house or a barn or an interesting street sign. The important thing here is just to make sure that you're maintaining a subject in your photograph so that it's not something that's lost on the viewer's eye, where they only see the sunrise, sunset, and there's nothing to sort of lead them into your photograph. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, that's tip number 2 for me. Take advantage of the moving weather patterns that create a higher volume of good sunrises and sunsets. So jumping into tip number 3 for me, and this is something that I'm trying to do a bit more here moving into the new year, And that's really two parts. It's shooting macro, and that means essentially just zooming in on some things in your immediate eyesight. That can be just a patch of moss, an interesting rock pattern, really anything, just sort of zooming in and keeping things as simple as possible. I'm somebody that always likes to go out and shoot these grand scenes, but I want to improve my photography around being able to shoot macro and keeping things simple and finding interesting textures, just to sort of round myself out as a photographer. And then related to that is breaking out my telephoto lens. Mine is 100 to 400 millimeter lens. Obviously people have different lenses, so you may not have a telephoto lens. But again, it's this sort of the same concept, although it's looking out into the distance, but maintaining some level of simplicity in the scene. For me, it's easy to go out and find these wide angle scenes and shoot them pretty well. But to be able to zoom in on something and really focus and create just a simple, good photo, that's something that I'm challenging myself for here this winter time. And it's a great time to do that because there is that opportunity to just find things may be a little bit more challenging to find to create a good photograph. So it makes you think a little bit more about what your surroundings are, whether that's right at your feet on the trail and finding something at the macro level, or it's just looking out into the distance and finding an image that you can keep as simple as possible. So that's tip 3 for me. Here's a photograph I actually captured it on my iPhone, just right on the side of the trail. Went out with my family for a New Year's Day hike. It was relatively, it's a winter hike, so there's not a whole lot of color, but I found this little patch of moss, I think it is, that had some interesting texture to it. And I'm really happy with this photograph, even though it's just something that I shot on my iPhone. So you don't need the best camera gear to get these types of things. It's all about just looking and thinking about what you want to create and taking the time to do it. And winter's a great time to sort of slow down and think about these types of things. So here's that image. So related to tip number 3, my tip number 4 is just to go out there and try something new. Explore different areas that you wouldn't typically photograph, or go back to the same locations and try different compositions. Play around with your camera, have fun. Just getting out there and trying some different things than you're used to really open up your skill set for future photo sessions. So for me personally, one of the things that I'm working on is photo stacking. Not necessarily just focus stacking, which I know is pretty popular in the photography community, but also going out there and shooting different shutter speeds and stacking those images. So I'm sharing out one here that I actually want. It's a waterfall photograph. It's one of those where I'm in the picture. But one of the things that I really wanted to capture here was having some detail to the pool of water here right in front of me, but still maintaining the texture of the waterfall itself there in the background. I know if you sort of shoot everything at a long exposure, then everything sort of turns white and gets a little bit milky. So I wanted to avoid that. So I actually stacked this as a 2-image set. So that's just one example of one of the things that I'm working on personally as a photographer. It can be anything for you, whatever skill set that you really want to improve on. Take the time during these slower months to go out there and just play around. So tip number 5 for me is just to go out there and scout locations. I know I mentioned this a little bit in tip number 4, but just to get out there during these slower periods of winter photography where you may not be getting the volume of amazing shots that you may get in other seasons, but it's a good places either that have been on your radar and you just haven't gotten a chance to go to, and get out there and just get to know a location a bit. Or it's going back to a place that you've been a million times and trying out different compositions or trying out different camera settings and really just having fun. The winter is the perfect time for just going out, being in nature, no matter how cold it is, And like I said, getting to know that place, your camera, improve as a photographer. That way, whenever you go back in more advantageous seasons, you sort of have an idea of what you want to shoot, or you've gotten to know that place a bit more, so you're better prepared when you go out there in the spring or summertime or fall. But it's important, and you're not always going to go, whatever season it is, you're not always going to go out there and get that magical shot. So if you can go out there and spend time at a place and really get to soak it in, try different angles, don't worry about getting that perfect shot. It's sort of the best way to learn and set yourself up for success in getting that shot that you really want to get. I know for me personally, I've been to some locations 5-10 times before I've gotten a shot that I'm really happy with. So it is important just to get out there. Photography as a whole, it's sort of muscle memory. The more you do it, the better off you're going to be, the more you're going to learn. So just trying out different things, and in the winter season is the perfect time to do that. So yeah, that's my 5 tips or tricks for winter photography. Thanks again, everyone, for joining my channel and viewing this episode. If you have any comments on this topic covered today, any other tips or tricks that you may have that you like to really focus this winter season in on. I know for a lot of people, they'd rather just put the camera gear away, dust it off in the spring. But I'm honestly interested in hearing what everyone else does during these slower months to keep themselves going. So drop that right in the comments. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. My plan is to release a new episode like this every 2 weeks. I'll probably start to do some shorts, whether it's just me hiking and you following along, or it's just some real quick hits. I'll try to throw some of those in here as well. But thanks for being part of this journey, and take care.